Hey, Sean's here, and this will be my solution for tasks 8 through 10 for the RHCSA lab by the boy Aggressive Hiker, as always. Now, this will be primarily about using Autofs, which is not really a command line tool. You can't really do anything with the command line for it. It's primarily a service daemon that, runs in the background, and whenever you attempt to access the network file share, like the one that we previously set up, or any network file share, or really any sort of device that could be mounted, like the typical way you would mount something using the mount command, it instead automatically does that for us without any interaction on our part, as long as it's configured properly to do so. Now, of course, the way that Autofs does this is through configuration files. Now, we've mostly been using I would say, command line interface tools up until now, but this is really where we're going to be mostly using configuration files. And System Administrator, primarily a lot of the work is done through kind of being able to navigate and know how to properly configure these configuration files. So this is kind of more in line with what you should be expecting a lot of your work to do, besides, of course, creating and developing shell scripts to automate tasks. So the first thing you really need to know about Autofs is that there are three main components. The first component, which is the most important one, is the auto.master file, located, of course, in Etsy. So this file, like I said, it's the master map file, and Autofs is really centered on the kind of concept of these map files. These are what they use to point the Autofs daemon to the files and directories that need to be mounted onto your local machine. So first, let's go ahead and get that installed. You can just do that by a DNF install with the Y flag, of course, to automatically confirm the installation. And we will be installing NFS utils and, of course, Autofs. And then, you might have to choose the repo. I think in this case it was base OS. So obviously I have both of those. So you'll see that, of course, it doesn't actually install anything, but for you, of course, it will install it. And of course, you'll have to repeat this on the second server, which I don't think I actually have it installed on here. So you'll actually see that get fully installed. NFS utils, Autofs. Use the repo, base OS. And oh, nope, I had it over there too. Okay, so yeah, run those, get that installed. So I'll start by just briefly taking you to a mount file, or rather the auto.master file, kind of letting you see what that looks like here. So I'm in the Etsy directory right now. Just go ahead and cat that out, and then of course pipe that to more, as always. You can see here, this is a sample auto.master file. So, well, this is the auto.master file, but this is just a sample at the top, an example, and you can see the various explanations of documentations here. So there's really three main components for any entry within the auto.master file. There is the mount point, the map file, and then any optional tags rather that you want to add on. And you can kind of see that they're right here, the mount point, the map file, they call it the map type rather, then of course the map options. And you of course can define the format as well if you so choose. You can see some examples of that right here. For example, this would be saying that the /misc directory is the mounting point. It would say that the etsy auto.misc is the map file, and then there are no options, so there's nothing there, but you could add options, of course, if you wanted to. You can see an example of such options right here. Actually, this no bind optional tag, this of course would be the location of the map file. And so primarily from the documentation I've seen, there are two other map files that are present. There are the auto.home map files, which of course would be for putting onto your local system, and then the auto.misc is for miscellaneous devices, things like CD-ROMs, like optical drives and whatnot, or other additional devices that could be mounted onto the system, virtualized or however it might be. And so briefly I will show you as well what the auto.misc file looks like. Write that to more, of course. I forgot it's actually quite short by default, so you can see this is an auto-mounted map, and it has the following format: key, details, and this is kind of what the format of entries within this would look like. You would have basically the type of device, then you would define the file system type, and then you would actually define where you want that to be mounted to. So you could have, say, a removable hard drive with the file system of x2, and then you would mount that at your dev/HDD point. So very simple, very easy, but typically you would actually be using more along the lines of the auto.home file. So with the auto.home file, if you've worked in enterprise IT before, you know that in most domain environments, you'll kind of have user profiles, right? Or rather domain profiles that are attached to a single user. And those are able to be flexibly moved around and kind of not really mounted, but essentially each computer can access and pull down from a central directory service the user's domain profile and dynamically allocate that profile to the computer. Typically, though, beyond that, there are additional configurations that can be made, things like logon scripts, GPOs in the case of Active Directory for Windows, and of course, also home directories, which is something that kind of is coming into play here as well. So with a home directory, you might have a user that has settings and GPOs and things like that linked to their profile. Sorry, I primarily come from a Windows background as far as maintaining a directory service from a centralized server, like with domain controllers and whatnot. So I might reference things that aren't exactly applicable to a Linux environment, but essentially home directory is just kind of a directory they could pull from the central server that they necessarily might not have attached to the role that they've been assigned to in a typical RBAC environment, whereas they might not get all the data they need from the overall generic files and directories that are loaded onto their device. They might need some specific files that they don't have in the cloud but do exist locally on premises on that centralized NFS share. So something like that, that's good for the auto.home. Now, a key thing with the auto.home is it's not actually typically made by default on a server environment like we have down here with a minimal installation. So we will have to create it ourselves and kind of build it from the ground up. So we'll go ahead and do that now. I, of course, already have it here. You can see if I do auto.home, go ahead and show that we do have it already here in the system, but you can create it just as easily with vi, etc. If you're not already in etc, you would of course type this, but I'm just doing the full path so you can see, of course, it would be in the etc directory at auto.home. Now you'll have it, of course, like I said, plain, completely empty. So the first thing you want to do in our situation, we're going to do it a different way, and this also might be a typical way that you might do it, but the first thing we're going to do is use the wildcard operator, which is the star symbol. You might have already been familiar with this operator if you've been using Linux for some time. As in most command line interfaces, this is, of course, like I said, known as the wildcard operator, and that just kind of signifies a all-encompassing scope, right? In this case, this is going to be said that within the scope or environment that this operator is applied to, we are going to be considering all objects within it. Now, why are we doing that? We'll see in just a moment. So next we will actually enter in, of course, the address of the server that we are going to be pulling these home profiles from, which of course is our reboot server, 192.168.55.47. Now, lastly, now that we have defined that, we are going to use the colon symbol to symbol that, or rather, not symbol, but to destruct the map file that we now want to pull a directory from within that server. So we are going to choose, of course, the export/home, because that is where our profiles, if you recall the names of the profiles that we had assigned. And instead of using, say, dot symbol or the wildcard operator, we're actually going to use a special variable for Autofs configuration, the ampersand symbol. And this essentially is kind of taking the place, you might be more familiar with, say, the $sign symbol that we would use in typical shell scripting within a Linux environment. This is essentially kind of the same thing. The $sign symbol is just used to indicate wherever there is an accompanying wildcard operator. This ampersand symbol is essentially taking place of that wildcard operator. So in this sense, this is kind of running essentially a mini for loop logic-wise for each, directory within this home directory. We're going to actually essentially replace that wildcard operator, going from top to bottom each one of those profiles. So say we have Manny, the first iteration runs through, replaces the ampersand symbol with Manny. The next one runs through and we replace the ampersand symbol with Mo, and so on and so forth until all profiles are completed. And then of course it will mount that at the destination that's specified previously within the master map file at auto.master. This is essentially, the map file is essentially saying where we're getting the directory from, while the auto.master is defining where that profile is going to be mounted to, if that makes sense. And same thing with the auto.misc. Auto.misc is defining where we're pulling that from and defining it to. So we'll go ahead and quit, save that. So now that that's done, if you recall, we never did actually edit the auto.master file. So now time to go ahead and do that. So of course we're already in Etsy, so we'll go to auto.master. So we'll just go ahead and replace this first line. So you can go ahead and hit an S here or hit X, whatever you want to do. It's fine. Play it how you choose. So the first thing, of course, is we're going to be choosing the mount point. The mount point, of course, is going to be on this local machine. So this is the mount point on the machine that we're currently on. So that's what you're defining here. So we're going to be making that for now flash mount, and we haven't created this yet, but this is where we're going to be creating it to, and this won't update in real time. Important to remember that this is a service daemon, so it needs to be restarted for configuration changes to take effect. So we're going to just say mount Autofs underscore home. That's where we're going to mount it to, and then space, because remember that's the mount point. Now we're going to specify the map file. And of course, that we just created the auto.home, so we're going to mount it there, and we're not going to be applying any options here. So you can go ahead, stop there, quit. That'll save it. So now, of course, we want to go ahead and make that mount point. And you can see we go in here. Oh, I actually didn't make it already. So we'll go ahead and make the Autofs home ls. It's there now. So now that all of that is done, if your service was already running or for whatever reason, then you just need to run a systemctl, of course, restart Autofs. If you were never running it, then you want to go ahead and enable it. You can use the now flag to also start it in the same space, or if not, then of course start it as well. I'm gonna go ahead and restart mine. So now we can actually go to cd mount Autofs, and we'll go ahead and do this just to show you something. So you can see that, of course, there's nothing actually there, even though that's, of course, the mount point. Because, of course, if you remember, Autofs is dynamically mounting that when you access that directory. So you might not actually see anything there, but that's because when you actually try to cd into, say, Manny, oops, I'm already in here. Hold on, let me go to here. If you cd into Manny, even though it's not there, as soon as we try to, you'll see that it automatically mounted it. And it's dynamically here now. And if we back out of it, you can see that it's actually there now. So anytime you, of course, are doing this, it's going to dynamically mount that. So even if it's there, all you have to do is say cd into Joe. I don't think actually, hold on. Yeah. cd, was it Jan? Yep, there's Jan. We back out, cd into, is it Marcia? Yeah. See that it's dynamically mounting them, and it will persist. It won't persist forever, because that's kind of the whole point. It's to save as much resource as possible. It'll persist for, I believe the default timeout is like 300 seconds, 5 minutes, and you can of course adjust that as necessary, as needed, to whatever you would like. So now you're free to, of course, access anything in those. You'll see that we have the default profiles in there. Of course, if we use the /LA flag to do a long list of all, and you'll see also as well that it has actually the file permissions that we did want to be set. So that's pretty much it for task 8. Like I said, it very simple. If you remember, we actually only added 2 lines of configurations. I just wanted to kind of explain the entire system because it is kind of a wider daemon that you can take control of, and there's a lot of things you can do with it, but that's just, of course, the kind of bare bones stuff that you can do as far as configuring and getting it set up. A lot of options and stuff you can add, a lot of more things, of course, you can add as well, and including scripting. So now we'll move on to the 9th task, and this will be just adding file permissions on creation, like a default file permissions when you actually have them mounted. So to find those, we'll go ahead and go over to the etc directory, of course. Again, we'll go to the login.definitions file. So you'll see here, this basically, of course, does very much what you might expect. So what we're looking for is to, of course, we're looking to change the default file permissions on creation for any files, of course, that are created, and that'll apply to things that are mounted as well. So what we're looking for to do so is, if you recall, the file permissions are set by certain bits ranging from 0 to 7 for read, writing, and executing, and the file permissions we're setting for this task are going to be 660. Now, you don't actually set that as the default file permissions. You're not setting it to 660. You're actually using what's called a UMask, and if you didn't know, that just stands for the user file creation mode mask. Now, this of course is a mouthful, so that's why you use UMask. So typical default file permissions, it can be set in another configuration file, but let's use, say we don't care about security, we'll use 777. And if you recall, these are the different bits that can be set, ranging from 0 to 7, 0 being no permission, 7 being all permissions, rewrite, and execute. And of course, those are arranged side by side by side, 3 different bits, one for the user, group, and others. So if we have a 7 in each field, that means users can read, write, execute, groups can read, write, execute, others can read, write, and execute. Now, here's where the UMask comes into play. So essentially, the UMask is just acting as a subtractor or detractor from the original file bits. So let's say we have the, again, example of 777 as the default file permissions. Let's apply a UMask of 777, see what happens. So we have 7 in the original bits, then we're taking away 7 bits. So 7 to 0, 7 to 0, 7 to 0 from all 3 bit columns. Now, of course, that would result in 0 file permissions across the board, which means you can't do anything to those files. Now, our objective is to change the default file permissions to 660 here. Now, the default file permissions on the system can change, and what would be the default file permission for our system, for example? How can we find that? Not actually available easily within your system, as they are hard-coded into your system calls for opening and creating files. So the easiest way to access that is just to Google it, honestly, or look up the documentation online, and you'll see, if you do so, that for rel 9, the default directory permissions are 0777, the default file permissions are 0666. And you may be wondering what that initial bit is, and that's something called the sticky bit, that's 0, and that controls whether or not the other class, the final bit, in, say, the typical file permissions like 777, it controls whether that final bit can actually delete or rename any files or subdirectories within a directory. And of course, for just a default file, that controls whether or not you can delete or rename the file if you are in that other class. So for the final task, task 10, we are just going to be doing some slight configurations, just changing kind of the password strength. So we're going to go back into the login.defs file, and we are going to be searching for, let's try pass. Yep. Okay, we pulled it up here. So I already have it set, of course, but it might say 999 by default. So you, of course, would just change that to 60. And then the other parameter is not actually in here. So we're going to go ahead and right quit out of this. The other one is going to be etc, I believe, security. And then let me see, passwordquality.conf. That's the one we want. Go ahead, go in here, and we are looking for the minimum length. And of course, I already have it set to 8, but this is basically just come in here, press S to replace. There's the 8. Then we are escaping, right quitting, and you are done. That is it for task 10 course, you would just need to exit, come back in, and enter your password. So now that that's done, you just want to go ahead and repeat that all on server 2. I've obviously already done that, and I think it would be kind of redundant just to show that at this point. Best way I would recommend doing this is just to SCP everything over. Well, you can go ahead and SCP the auto.the auto.home, give that nancy auto.master, then you can go to the login.defs, then you can go to the XC security password quality.conf, SCP all of those over. Of course, on the second server, make sure that you create the mount Autofs home directory, and of course that you install the NFS utils Autofs on the second server as well. Restart all of those, maybe even reboot the system, probably the fastest way to do that, and then you are done. Everything will be configured, set up, and that is all of tasks 8, 9, and 10. Like always, like, comment, subscribe, all that good jazz, and we'll be moving on to the next task. See ya.